just as in your experience, everything went into slow motion. I remember looking behind, and I could see the faces on the drivers behind us, the sort of frightened faces of the drivers behind us. I could see the long lines of cars stretching behind us. I think we were just going up a slight slope. And everything became very clear, as if I had a kind of heightened awareness. But also, strangely, sounds became muffled. Everything outside the car became strangely silent. And maybe what was strangest about the experience was that I felt incredibly calm.
Hey everyone, this is Larry Weeks. Welcome to the Bounce Podcast. I'm recording this at the end of the year. It's December 31st. And question for you, did the year go by fast for you? Or did it go by slow? It flew by for me. And there's a reason for that. And that's what this podcast is about today. I think you'll find it very interesting. So this podcast is about time. We all treat it kind of like a fixed currency. We got 24 hours, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year, yada, yada. We need to spend it well. We need to optimize it. Don't waste it. But this is not about time management or clock and calendar management, if you will. This is about the subjective elasticity of time. In other words, our experience of it. And my guest on this podcast, his proposition is that we can actually stretch or contract the seconds we're given. Pretty cool, right? Now, this already happens in our lived experience, and we just talked about it. How fast did this year go by? But usually without an anchor or agency. We just have our experience of it. Some moments, the boring ones, kind of stretch into eternity. Other moments seem to disappear as soon as they arise. My guest on this podcast is Professor Steve Taylor. Steve is an author. He's a researcher in psychology. He's written many books on consciousness, psychology, and spirituality. He's a senior lecturer at Leeds Beckett University, has been the chair of the Transpersonal Psychology at the British Psychological Society. He writes the popular blog Out of Darkness for Psychology Today magazine. He's also written for Scientific American. He regularly writes for The Conversation and for the Psychologist magazine. And he has a book called Time Expansion Experiences. Now, it's the touchstone for our conversation today. And in it, I'm going to say he argues or he proposes, his thesis is that time isn't just something the clock measures, but it's something our attention, absorption, novelty, and even our ego can reshape. Now, those are my words, not his. But on this episode, we explore all this. And we talk about things like the slow motion phenomena common in accidents, why childhood feels so long while adulthood stays on fast forward. It seems how states like meditation, flow, and deep focus can make time expand or even disappear, at least subjectively. We discuss the surprising role of novelty and how to reintroduce it. We discuss proportionality theory of time perception. We talk about automation, how the brain edits out reality to make life efficient, how we can reverse that, and why single tasking can have a sort of meditative effect and expand time. The problem with social media, how it quietly speeds up our sense that life is passing us by. We discuss his research on time cessation experiences, when people report that time stops, like in psychedelics or near-death experiences. We discuss the block universe theory, and we also get into things like the life review phenomena, and it's a wide-ranging discussion. It moves from metaphysics to real-world advice, such as how to structure a vacation and how can we subjectively lengthen our life. I'm not promising you that you can feel less rushed without changing a crazy schedule, but I think my guest would suggest that you can change the internal speed at which you experience that schedule, and I tend to agree with him. So without further ado, here's Steve Taylor. Thank you for joining me on the show here. I appreciate it. Are you in the UK?
I am, yeah. I'm in Manchester in the UK.
I love the UK. I would go, prior to the pandemic, every year. I was doing some consulting with a company up there in Lichfield, Birmingham, somewhere else I don't recall. But prior to that, when I was at Google, I spent like 3 months in London. So I really like it. It's probably my ancestral pull or
yeah,
something.
Yeah. Well, you got British ancestors.
Well, I did my DNA test. Yeah.
Oh, right.
I sunburn very easily. I'm in the club.
Yeah, it reminds me of the song I like a singer called, Van Morrison, the singer?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he's got a song called The Celtic Ray. It's all about the Celtic mothers calling the children home from wherever in the world, you know.
I've never heard that song. Wow.
Yeah, it's a great song. Yes. Come home, children. Come home, children.
I got to check it out. Thank you for taking the time. I'm very curious about your book and your work. Can you, for our audience, tell us what you're up to these days? Are you still lecturing at Leeds?
I am, yeah. I'm a researcher and lecturer in psychology at Leeds Beckett University. I specialize in transpersonal psychology, which is really the psychology of unusual states of consciousness and unusual anomalous experiences.
How is that field these days? Is there a narrowing, contracting around it, or is it more open? Has it changed in the last 20 years?
It seems to be opening because there's a lot of interest in mindfulness meditation. There's a lot of interest in psychedelics, which obviously overlaps with transpersonal psychology. And also in consciousness, there's a lot of discussion about consciousness. And transpersonal psychology is all about consciousness, specifically unusual states of consciousness.
Does it bleed across fields?
Yeah, it kind of merges with all of those areas. You know, some people who study consciousness are philosophers who want to understand, where does consciousness come from? Is it just a product of the human brain, or is it something universal or something fundamental? And psychologists, you know, they're looking to different states of consciousness, like we do in transpersonal psychology. We might look into higher states of consciousness or altered states of consciousness. So yeah, it overlaps with spirituality too. You could say that spirituality is all about transformational states of consciousness. So that's one of the things about consciousness, that it overlaps with a number of different disciplines.
You know, maybe we'll touch on it again, just because of the nature of the topic. But the theory that consciousness may be a fundamental aspect of the universe is fascinating to me. Panpsychism, things of this nature, which leads me to my conversation with you, because I've gone down the rabbit hole of the last 10 years or so, meditation and mindfulness. And these things have really opened up a sense of mystery in my life, where I've kind of let go of, I'm more open, I guess I should say, in my life than I have been before on these type of concepts. And I think I'm benefiting from it. I'm all about experience. So, which brings me to your book and this whole idea of time. From a science standpoint, I just play the other side and say, hey, where are you coming from? And just so that we can dot the I's here, cross T's.
Yeah, sure.
But I'm open. At this point, if I die and there's a big bunny rabbit saying, hey, why should I let you in? I'm not going to be surprised, Steve, at all. Okay? If it's a Martian, I'm not going to be surprised. If Jesus says, hey, everything in the Sunday school books are real, I'm going to go, I knew it, whatever. I'm open. I just want you to know me. Okay? All right. But I'm cognizant of my audience. Let's just jump into it here, because at the end of the day, for me, the cash value of life is experience, and experience is everything. And it's very subjective, right? But it's the only thing we ever actually have is experience.
Yeah.
And I want to land on the question of, how do we improve our experience of life by changing how we relate to time through attention and awareness? That's where I want to land when I have this conversation with you. Okay. That's kind of where we're going here, because I may meander. I think you open in the book, or you talk about an accident you had. Is that right?
That's right.
I had this experience with my wife. We were in Miami, and we had rented a motor scooter in South Beach, and we were having a good time. But coming back from the beach, it started to rain, so we waited. It wasn't letting off much. But as soon as I saw a little window, we got on the scooter and we went back to our hotel. And we were in some downtown area. It was very heavy traffic. I don't remember why, but I had to brake real quickly. Either somebody pulled in or somebody stopped, or don't remember. But the brakes locked up, the front brakes, and then we flipped. I flipped the entire scooter. She was on the back, and my experience was time really slowed down. And I think I've heard this story from a variety of other people's experiences, but it was, and my wife and I compared our experience. It was the same thing. We saw everything in slow motion. And at the end of the day, we were fine. It was just scuffle. People jumped out. They were very generous and pulled us out. I just wanted to throw my story in.
Yeah, well, I had essentially the same type of experience. Also with my wife, we were in the car on the highway, or motorway as we call them here in the UK, probably traveling at 60 miles an hour. We were in the middle lane of a busy motorway, and a truck was on the inside lane and pulled out. He didn't see us, so he pulled out into the middle lane and hit the back of our car. as we were going past him. So our car started to spin round, and I heard a noise, and it seemed like there was a long pause. And I said to my wife, "What was that noise?" Then it seemed like there was another long pause, and then the car started to spin. And then the truck hit us again. Just as in your experience, everything went into slow motion. I remember looking behind, and I could see the faces on the drivers behind us, the sort of frightened faces of the drivers behind us. I could see the long lines of cars stretching behind us. I think we were just going up a slight slope. And everything became very clear, as if I had a kind of heightened awareness. But also, strangely, sounds became muffled. Everything outside the car became strangely silent. And maybe what was strangest about the experience was that I felt incredibly calm. I knew straight away, I thought, wow, this is a dangerous situation. This could be, serious injury. Maybe we could even die in this situation. But I wasn't scared at all. I was very calm, and I began to think very methodically. I thought, what can I do? And I tried a series of things. I tried the brake, the handbrake. I tried shunting the car towards the breakdown lane, the shoulder. And we must have spun round a few times. And luckily, I don't know if it was because I shunted the car in that direction, but we span towards the breakdown lane and crashed into a barrier. And I remember looking over at my wife, and I thought, "Whoa, wow, she's not injured." Then I looked down at my legs, and I thought, "Wow, I'm not injured." And I thought, "Wow, it seems like a miracle that we're not injured." But anyway, at that point, when we crashed into the barrier, it was as if everything went back to normal. Time went back to a normal speed, and my perception became normal. The sounds became louder. And when I think back to it, the incident could not have been longer than maybe a few seconds, 3 or 4 seconds perhaps. But in my mind, in my subjective experience, it felt much longer. I would estimate maybe 30 or 45 seconds. So yeah, it was as if I went into a kind of a wormhole in which time just stretched out. That's essentially what happened in your experience. And yeah. I recently conducted a survey of over 1,000 people, and 70% of people have had at least one of these time expansion experiences, as I call them. Many people have had them several times or more.
Were you already on the road to these concepts as far as time expansion goes, or was this the spark to kind of investigate these type of experiences?
Well, this was about 10 years ago. And
okay. Oh, okay. All right.
Several years before that, I had actually written a book about time. But in that book, I was mainly focusing on more normal, milder types of time variation, such as why time seems to slow down when we go to foreign countries and have lots of new experiences, why time seems to speed up as we get older, why it seems to slow down when we're bored or in pain, and things like that. So I hadn't really investigated those radically different time experiences. So after I had that accident, it was a spur to, conduct research in that particular area.
I think you reject the retrospective illusion theory for hypermemory, a hypermemory hypothesis, I believe. Could you explain for the audience retrospective illusion versus maybe present reality?
Yeah, that's one theory of these experiences, is that they don't actually take place in the moment. It only seems that time slowed down when we look back from the future. The theory is that when we have these experiences, we become very alert. We take in a lot of memories because they're such intense experiences. So when we look back from the future, we have lots of memories to draw on. And therefore, it seems that these were, very long-lasting experiences. But according to that theory, time does not actually slow down in the moment. That's just an illusion when we look back. But I reject that theory, partly because, I've met hundreds of people, or interviewed hundreds of people who've had these experiences, and almost nobody believes it was an illusion. They all believe it was a present tense experience. In the survey I just mentioned, only 6% of people, this is over 1,000 people, believe the experience could have been an illusion of recollection. And also, in these experiences, many people do report very methodical, very detailed, preventative action, which wouldn't have been possible if time had been flowing at a normal speed. So it really does seem that time opens up, maybe partly to allow us to take preventative measures to help save our lives, or at least to save us from serious injury.
I would assume then you you're open to the idea that physiology, there's some aspect of our bodies and minds and vision or consciousness, whatever, that in a given circumstance can do some extraordinary things. I think of you hear these stories about people getting very strong. Maybe they're pinned under something or adrenaline jacks them up. Is that a possibility you consider?
It's a possibility. I mean, another area where these experiences are quite common is sport. There are loads of examples of people playing sports, and they're in a mode of deep concentration, intense concentration, and suddenly they seem to slip into a strange, altered state of consciousness in which time slows down. Mm-hmm. So they have a lot of time to position themselves, to respond to their opponent's actions. And, obviously that's a massive advantage when you play sport. So these moments when time slows down are normally moments of peak performance. It's when people break records or when they win competitions. And I've got this theory that some of the greatest sports people, the greatest athletes of all time, let's say people like Michael Jordan in basketball, there's the American baseball player Ted Williams.
Yes.
Is he familiar? And maybe Lionel Messi, the soccer player. I think these people maybe had the ability to slip into an altered state of consciousness in which time slowed down. And that's why they were so accomplished, why they broke records. In fact, Ted Williams actually spoke about that. He was apparently the first person to use the phrase "in the zone" back in the 1950s, I think. He said that when the baseball was hurtling towards him at, 120 miles an hour or something, he said he could, in his mind, it was so slow, he could see the individual stitches on the ball. And he felt as though he had a lot of time to prepare to make his shot. So, in sport, obviously sports are very intense, so there could be an element of adrenaline as well. But I think where that theory is difficult is when you look into certain other situations when these experiences occur. They also occur in meditation, for example, deep meditation. They can also occur under the influence of psychedelics. In fact, time expansion is one of the main characteristics of psychedelics. A lot of people speak about how a few minutes seems to stretch into hours or even longer. So meditation and psychedelics, you wouldn't associate those with a high level of adrenaline. And actually, in time expansion experiences, in accidents and emergencies, you would think that there would be an element of high adrenaline. But actually, people report feeling very calm, like I did in my experience. So you wouldn't associate that with a higher level of adrenaline. So I think the physiological aspects are a bit unclear. What is clear is that these experiences always take place in altered states of consciousness. So I think that's the key to understanding them.
Yeah, when it comes to sports, I've played sports my whole life, but I'm a big tennis player. I still play. Oh, you're a tennis player?
Yeah, I'm not very good, but I play.
No, anybody, who's
I haven't had any time expansion experiences in tennis.
Yeah, it can be very frustrating, the opposite effect. But I've experienced, it's been a while, but I've experienced flow states in tennis where it feels like it subjectively feels like I can't miss. It's funny that I never reflect on why at the time I feel like that. I chalk it up to some form of confidence or I got a lot of sleep, I'm rested, I'm not a bunch of factors. But what I was going to say is I have a friend who I play with a lot, and he has told me that like sometimes he'll play out of his mind and he'll tell me things like the ball looked huge and that he just can't not hit. He's not going to miss. It just feels like the ball is very big, and uses phrases like that. So yes, I've had little experiences of that. Other people, like this guy's telling me how. And I think Jordan or other, because I play basketball in high school and I used to watch it a lot. I don't anymore, but I've heard basketball players say the hoop looks huge, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just like a massive circle. Was it your thesis that the time expansion experience, let's say when things slow down, when there's an emergency or accident of some nature, and the flow state that these players get in that we're talking about just now, those are similar in nature?
They're similar, yeah.
Okay.
Flow is often defined as a state of intense absorption. And obviously when sports people are in a state of flow, they are these are usually times of peak performance. A lot of sports people talk about how they could be playing in front of maybe 50,000 people, but they're completely unaware of the crowd. They don't even hear the crowd because they're so absorbed in the game. But there's a state which I call super absorption. And it's when attention becomes so intense, absorption becomes so intense that you seem to switch into a radically different state of consciousness. And that's when the ball seems to grow in size. That's when time seems to expand drastically. I mean, normally flow makes time pass quite quickly. That's when if you watch a really entertaining film, or if you write or paint for a few hours, time can go really quickly. It can seem to almost disappear. But when you get into a really intense state of absorption, a state of super absorption, then it's as if, you pass through a gateway and time suddenly opens up and stretches out and seems to expand drastically. So I think there are different levels of absorption, and time expansion experiences usually occur in a state of extremely intense absorption.
Because I want to talk about, as we land the plane a little later, is there's some cases where we might want time to speed up. You're waiting in line, or I don't know. But for the most part, love to have the subjective experience of a longer life, a good life, where the good moments of life or the experiences last longer from a subjective experience. I don't know the metaphysics, so which we're going to talk about, because I want to ask you about the block theory of time. But for right now, time expansion experiences, we're generally talking about slowing things down, right? Is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And obviously, I've read your book. It seems like again, part of your thesis is that this is because of the loss of ego or self, or no?
My theory is basically that what we think of as a normal experience of time is really just a construct of our normal consciousness. It's produced or generated by our normal psychological processes. So there's nothing stable or objective about it. It really is just a construct of our normal state of mind. So when we shift into a different state of consciousness, our experience of time shifts. As soon as our consciousness shifts a little bit, our experience of time shifts a little bit. And when our consciousness shifts intensely or drastically, our experience of time also shifts dramatically. And usually, for some reason, that means that time slows down. So there are certain, slight variations of consciousness, like a flow state when time can speed up, or boredom. Intense boredom can really slow down time. Novel experiences can also slow down time because they intensify our perception. But generally, when we shift into a radically altered state of consciousness, which may be due to an accident, it may be due to psychedelics, or it could be due to the intense absorption of playing sport, then time tends to slow down. And there's a correlation between the intensity of an altered state of consciousness and the intensity of time dilation. In other words, the more intense the alteration, the more expansive time becomes. And I think that is partly to do with our ego boundary. And I say that partly because in all time expansion experiences, well, let's say in most time expansion experiences, people report a different awareness of space. They say that they were somehow outside their bodies. They were looking down, or they had this kind of overview of the scene. Or they say that they felt part of their surroundings. They felt connected to their surroundings. So there's a loss of separation. The ego boundary becomes quite soft and thin. So there is a connection. When our ego boundaries become soft and thin, that's when time expansion occurs.
Okay, I'm just trying to figure out how to summarize this. So it is, in part, you're saying, when the thoughts of self kind of recede.
Yeah.
Is it degree, like the more the ego recedes, the more potential for the TEE, the time expansion experience? Is it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the softer our ego boundary becomes. Maybe the best way to think of it is that normally we have this experience.
I mean, an accident is going to pull me out of myself just by nature of survival. Everything's going automatic, I would assume. So, boom, I'm not concerned about what I'm wearing or whatever.
It's partly that. I think the sheer shock of an accident jolts us into a radically different state of consciousness. It's a bit like
psychedelics. Yeah,
it's like taking a psychedelic. An accident is like a sudden psychedelic experience. You're in a different state of consciousness. That's why your awareness becomes heightened. That's why sound, everything sounds different. Everything usually sounds muffled. and you have this feeling of being part of your surroundings. And yeah, we do normally have this experience of feeling as if we're living inside our own mental space. I'm living in here. The world is out there. You're out there. All of the people are out there. It feels as if there's a kind of boundary. But in these experiences, that boundary seems to fade away and we feel part of our surroundings. And and that's when time expansion occurs. So there's a strong connection between spatial awareness and temporal awareness. So time expansion is always associated with spatial expansion, if you like.
All right. Let's touch on when time speeds up. So Christmas is coming earlier every year. Okay. Steve,
Yeah.
I'm like, what is 2026? It's just the older I get, right? It's speeding up. So let's talk about that, why that is. And we have some theories, and I'm just going to jump to, I think you tend to agree with William James and not the proportional theory of time. But can you tell me what William James' theory, I think it has to do with novelty. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. I mean, William James, he talked about these ideas, maybe 130 years ago in his book, The Principles of Psychology. So he was a very, forward-thinking psychologist. And even in his time, people were debating, why does time seem to speed up? And why do children seem to have such a slow down time perception? But as we get older, time seems to shrink every year. So there is this proportional theory, the idea that every year, as you get older, every year makes up a smaller proportion of your life. When you're 4 years old, a year is a quarter of your life.
This is Paul Janet's. Is this Paul Janet? Is this proportional theory?
Yeah, okay. He's a philosopher who said this originally back in 1860, I think it was, or 1870. Okay. So yeah, these are very old ideas. But William James, his main belief was that it's related to perception, that when you're a child, you're living in a world of newness. You're experiencing everything for the first time. You're having lots of experiences for the first time. And you're living, children are like aliens who are beamed down to a strange planet. Everything is strange and exotic and beautiful to them and fascinating. But as we get older, on the one hand, we have fewer new experiences because we're just repeating experiences. And there's also, in my view, there's this kind of a desensitization that as we get older, we become more, the world becomes more familiar. We don't pay as much attention because we're living in a world of increasing familiarity. So there's less newness around us. And I mean, fundamentally, it's about the more newness we take in, the more information we take in, the slower time goes. So lots of research has established that there's a connection between information processing and time. The more information our minds process, the slower time goes. So if you're a child, you're processing a massive amount of information because there's so much newness. But as we get older, gradually and sort of cumulatively, we absorb less information because there's less newness. And that gives us the impression that time is speeding up.
So, therefore, introducing novelty, new experiences, or learning new things would theoretically slow things down in our subjective experience. Or expand time.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah. There's a kind of thought experiment I use in the book. And it's the two twins. I think Einstein used this to demonstrate his theory of relativity, but I use it to demonstrate the relativity of time perception in relation to psychology. And it's that there are two twins. One of them leaves school at 15 or 16 and takes a job in her hometown and settles down with a family and has children, spends a whole life living in the same town, doing the same things. But the other twin is more adventurous and she starts traveling as soon as she leaves school. She lives in lots of different countries, does a lot of different jobs, has a massive amount of experience. And if you assume that these two twins die on the same day, maybe when they're 8 years old, the second twin will actually have experienced much, much more time than the first twin. Subjectively, she will have lived a much longer life, a dramatically longer life than the first twin, because she's had so much new experience. And all this new experience has stretched her perception of time.
I'm sorry, this is a thought experiment. Did you say this was a thought experiment or?
Yeah, it's kind of like an example.
Okay,
or a thought experiment.
Okay. I'm going to lay some rubber on the road a little bit so that a lot of this is applicable. Let me throw some things at you. So if I take a vacation, is it better for me to stay in one place or every 3 days change to a different location?
Well, interestingly, I did a survey about this.
Really? Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
I surveyed people who were returning from holidays. I went to Manchester Airport, close to where I live in the UK. And I asked people whether they felt that time had gone quickly while they were away. And I also asked them what type of vacation they'd had, whether it was a kind of tourist vacation where they were staying in a hotel for 2 weeks, or whether it was a business trip, whatever it was. And there was a strong correlation between, well, people often said, people who went to tourist resorts, they often said that the first week went slowly, but the second week went really quick. Whereas people who'd been on sort of more adventurous holidays, where they were traveling around India, or people who'd been on business trips, they said that the whole trip seemed to last for, a very long time. They'd been away for maybe 3 weeks, but they felt like they'd been away for 3 months. So there was definitely a correlation between the, more adventurous vacations and more kind of touristy type vacations when people stayed in the same resort. So in other words, the more adventurous holidays lasted for longer, or vacations lasted for longer.
Have you parsed this? I'm just curious, because if I go on vacation to a place I've never been, that's just pure novelty. Every place I go to is new. Based on what you're telling me, can I stack that? In other words, I'm going to a new place I've never been. That's time expansion. In the new place, now I'm going to different places over some cadence. Am I expanding even more? Does that make sense?
Well, it depends, because there is a mechanism in our minds that turns novelty to familiarity.
Quickly.
Yeah, quite quickly.
Yeah.
I mean, according to what those people were telling me, it happened within a week. Within a week, the tourist resort become familiar.
Okay. All right.
So, yeah, it depends, and often people who go to those places, often it's an environment which is similar to their home environment. There's not so much novelty in it. But I went to India. About 20 years ago, I went to India for 6 weeks, traveling around, spending a few days, and then traveling to another place. And when I came home, I felt like I'd been away for 6 months.
Yeah, that's a different planet.
Yeah, it's a different planet. Exactly. I felt like I'd been to a different planet for 6 months. Yeah. There was so much unfamiliarity that was almost overwhelming, was almost too much. My nervous system couldn't really deal with all the familiarity.
I want to go to Japan for that reason. I just hear I've never been. I've been to India, but I haven't been to Japan.
Obviously, if I go to the States or you come to the UK, it's not so different. Obviously, to a degree, it's different, but there's not so much unfamiliarity compared to India or Japan.
My hack for this, and it wasn't meant necessarily for traveling or what have you, but meditation, mindfulness. I have, to me, the practice of meditation and mindfulness has wrung out every bit of experience I could get from traveling to somewhere. Because I think if I'm settled, like I'm taking more of it in versus, like you said, if it looks familiar, instead of just discarding it as an experience and being present, there's some newness that I'm extracting from the experience.
Yeah.
So if somebody's married for 25 years, they're having the same conversations. Life is just going to fly by. Is there any hacks for this? Is it having a different subject to talk about? Like, I'm being overly micro here, but I'm just curious.
Yeah. Well,
that just popped up in my head. Yeah.
I've been married for 26 years.
Do I wear a wig? Do I dye my hair? What? Yeah.
I feel as though that in my marriage, there's always it's kind of dynamic. It's a kind of process. It's not kind of static, or it's kind of open-ended, and it keeps kind of growing.
That's
my
true.
Relationship with my partner. Yeah. I think a healthy relationship does kind of evolve, and there's always newness in it. As you evolve as a person, your relationships also evolve. Ideally, some people stop evolving, some relationships stop evolving, and that's usually when relationships start to die, when people start growing together.
And it may be, that's interesting. If they stop evolving, that may have to do with their subjective experience of time, and I don't know. That's just interesting.
Yeah, I think it applies to life in general. A lot of people, it's a human instinct people like to travel, but maybe when you're young, you travel around the world for a few years, if you're lucky. But at a certain point, everybody seems to want to settle down, and, maybe they want to have kids, or just they want to live a more stable, a more settled lifestyle and follow some kind of career or purpose. But I think the problem is that when people settle down, they also limit their experience. Their life becomes a little bit too easy and too comfortable. They stop growing, and as a result of that, time also seems to go very quickly. People often say, "Oh wow, I can't believe my kids are 18." The last 10 years seem to have just flown by. But that doesn't have to be the case. You could go back to what you were saying about meditation. If you meditate regularly, you should develop that kind of open awareness that people have when they go on vacations. You don't necessarily have to go on a vacation to develop a sense of newness, a sense of curiosity.
I was early on when I was meditating and just being present, mindful, the basics. I was in a waiting room of it was a clinic, some kind of medical clinic. And I remember catching myself noticing the wood on the chair and the type of wood and the texture. I've been on automatic pilot, just kind of going places, and a chair is a chair, you sit down. But there's been times like that where opening up your awareness to what's going around. I just can't believe how unobservant I've been my whole life.
I know. I often have that feeling. If I have a good meditation, I open my eyes and maybe I look at a shirt or a cup and I think, wow, I notice a pattern on the cup, which has always been there, but I've never noticed the flowers or the colors on this cup. Or maybe the pattern on the shirt. I've never really paid attention to it, the flowers on a shirt or whatever. But yeah, meditation does give us a enhanced awareness. And interestingly, there is a lot of research showing that meditation slows down our time perception. There was a study showing that people who've meditated regularly for several years, they do have a slightly slower perception of time than others. So and I think it's definitely connected to that sense of openness, opening the doors of perception. So that on a daily basis, on an ordinary basis, you have a sense of newness, in relation to the objects around you.
I was trying to think what happened to my perception of time during the pandemic, because all of a sudden travel was less, you're in the home, and when I think of it, my feelings change. It's like, wow, how long did that last? And I tend to lose orientation when I think of the pandemic. How long was that? When was that? You know what I mean? It was just odd, just a very odd thing. I read an article by Amy Middleton who cites a conversation with neuroscientist Dr. Ramon Velasquez, and he frames staying inside, cabin fever, as sensory overload. Staying inside all day reduced novelty, movement, spatial challenge, environmental cues. So he mentions that the brain's attention, planning, and memory systems, prefrontal cortex, the hippocampus, they don't get the stimulation they're built to expect. So the effect then, over time, this monotony affects motivation, mood, sleep, and he claims the prolonged indoor sameness can dysregulate the whole emotional mood motivation system, which increases stress, reactivity. I think he mentions the amygdala, which then has this downstream effect and worsens focus. And to me, this is a warning about remote work, in my opinion, for young people, and not a prohibition, but just a warning to get out of the house. Isolation, monotony can lead to slower learning, weaker memory. So going outside is a fast reset. Your brain needs contrast and difference. Tell me, did you touch on in the book, and by the way, I read fast just to make sure I fit it in and prepped, and I recommend other people to certainly read this. But is there some metaphysics that you're trying to offer in your theory of time expansion experiences? So specifically, you mentioned the block universe theory, which I find is fascinating, right? This is Minkowski. He worked with Albert Einstein, is that right? Or taught?
Yeah, I think he was Einstein's tutor, but he developed the block theory based on Einstein's
space-time theory. Yeah. So just for our audience, and this is my explanation, you tell me if I'm in the ballpark. The block theory is the idea the universe is like a 4D block, and it has 3 dimensions plus 1 of time, right? 3 of space, 1 of time, but they're all laid out together. They're all existing at the same time. Is that right?
Yeah.
Am I with you?
That's right. Yeah.
Now, this is where I get lost, because I'm not a physicist or even a philosopher here. But so each moment in this theory is not necessarily unique or new. It's just I'm moving through these different blocks. Is that right?
Yeah. It's as if you're moving across a landscape. You're not moving forward in time. You're moving across the space-time continuum. So
is it like a film? Let's say I just roll out a movie and I have all the frames in front of me at the same time.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
It's as if you're standing at the top of a mountain overlooking a landscape. So the landscape is kind of spread in front of you. It's a panoramic landscape. So the idea of, of something being in front of us or behind us makes no sense. It's just all around us. So time is really like space. It's panoramic. So in theory, you can travel across time. So yeah, if you want to take the theory to its logical conclusion, it's suggesting that the past and the future somehow exist alongside the present as a part of this panoramic landscape. I also investigate what I call, on the one hand, I have time expansion experiences, but in my research, I found that some people would report that time had not just expanded, it had actually stopped altogether. Time had disappeared. There was no time. And this, I call these time cessation experiences. They're more rare than time expansion experiences. They usually only occur in very deep states of meditation or very intense mystical experiences, and also in near-death experiences. When people physiologically die for a short time before they're resuscitated, they often say that when they experience this strange state of consciousness, time was completely absent, or somehow time had become panoramic, so the past and the future existed alongside the present. Often people who have near-death experiences report a life review in which, this is where the phrase, "my life flashed before my eyes," comes from. They feel that in this very short space of time, it may be a few seconds or a few minutes of normal time, they witness or re-experience every event of their lives. And again, it's a bit like a landscape. The whole of their lives appears as kind of landscape before them. So they have an overview of the landscape of their lives. So these are called time cessation experiences. And they do seem to suggest that time is spatial, and that in some sense, which is very difficult to understand, the past still exists and the future already exists. And it seems to make no sense from a kind of common sense perspective, but it does fit with a lot of the theories in physics, a lot of physics theories. It fits with the block universe theory. And there are also lots of strange theories and findings in quantum physics, as I'm sure you know. In quantum physics, just as you can't say exactly where a particle is until you observe it, it could be everywhere, it could be nowhere. Until you observe it, then you pin it down in one particular location. The same applies to time. You can't say where a particle is in terms of future, present, or past until you observe it, and then it's situated in the past, present, or future. But until you observe it, it's really nowhere in time or everywhere in time. So yeah, there are lots of strange theories and findings that also suggest that our normal view of time is in some sense illusory, and that, maybe in some weird sense, time is not linear. Time, past, present, and future coexist together as a part of a landscape of time.
I don't think this fits, but I'll just say, I want to say we're living in an eternal now.
No, I think that does fit. In fact, a lot of mystics who experience a very intense higher state of consciousness in a deep state of meditation or in a intense mystical experiences. I mean, that's where the phrase "the eternal now" comes from. There was a sense that all of the future and all of the past are part of the present. The now expands or extends to the point where it becomes eternal. And, we don't live in a instantaneous, narrow present. Our present is actually encompasses the whole of time. So I think that is a valid term.
I think it's interesting, and just to kind of, if not blow our minds, kind of open up our minds to what we don't know about time. But let me bring it back down to, and by the way, those possibilities also can inform what you're saying about time expansion experiences and consciousness. Let me ask you what you think about the attention economy, and let's say digital, social media, these things, we're scrolling on our phones, what that does to time. What type of distortion, how is it harmful from a standpoint of our subjective experience of time? I don't know how to frame it. But I just wrote it down. I was very curious what you thought.
I think one of the main problems with social media or use of the internet in general is that it kind of fragments our attention. It means that we're less likely to get into a state of absorption. If you only have one thing to focus on, you give it your whole attention, and at a certain point you switch into a state of flow, and you start to become creative. You start to think in a slightly different way to normal. Things emerge unexpectedly and spontaneously. But if your attention is continually shifting around every few seconds to a different post or a different social media platform, you're not getting into a state of absorption and none of your creativity is manifesting itself. I mean, in terms of time,
you're just blowing the time out the window. You're just eating it up. I'm assuming it.
yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, people do often say that, you know, they start to doom scroll and an hour passes without them realizing.
Oh, okay.
So it's quite insidious in that way. But I think the worst thing is that it's not allowing you to get into a state of absorption. It's not permitting time expansion, because as I said before, often you need to get into a state of very intense absorption to experience time expansion, unless it occurs in an accident or under the influence of psychedelics. But yeah, I think it's quite insidious and detrimental in that way.
So let me just summarize some of the things that we said and help me have a better relationship to time and not only appreciate it, expand it, whatever. But so if I need time to expand, so like we talked about the vacations, we already touched on this. Mindfulness, have more novelty, maybe different locations. This expands a vacation this is part of expanding time. If I need time to fly, maybe I need to seek flow. By that, I mean, maybe narrow my attention into a singular absorbing task, reading, a game, I don't know, sports. Am I right?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Yeah. Flow normally makes time pass very quickly. So if you're on an airplane, what I do when I go on airplanes or long train journeys, I always give myself a piece of writing to focus on. I start to write my next chapter of my book. And when I get absorbed in it, time goes very, very quickly. You know, a few hours seems to pass in maybe what seems like 2 hours in my subjective experience. So yeah, that's the ideal thing to get into a state of flow.
Is learning something new that you want to learn, I don't know if that's flow or time expansion or can be both.
Well, it could be both. It's probably both, but that they maybe cancel each other out, because obviously there's the newness that you're learning, but also there's the state of flow that you may enter. So you have a bit of time expansion, a bit of time contraction as well. So they could cancel each other out.
Could you touch on real quickly automatization?
Yeah, I talked about that briefly before. That's there seems to be a mechanism in our minds that switches us off to new experience. You know, it's like you say, we travel to a foreign environment, a different country. It seems incredibly real, incredibly interesting and exhilarating for maybe a few weeks. But after a while, it starts to become familiar. You know, after a few months, it's not so different to your home environment that you came to escape from. So yeah, there is a mechanism in our minds that switches us off to new experience. It's probably some kind of evolutionary mechanism, because it was probably beneficial for us to focus our attention rather than being distracted by our surroundings. And it can happen very quickly. It's like, you know, in the old days, I remember going to pubs here in the UK that would be filled with smoke. And I think, wow, how can anybody be in here? It's just so ridiculously smoky and unpleasant. But within half an hour, you know, I'd sort of edited it out and it just become bearable. So it's that mechanism. That's the automatization.
So some de-automation practices would be one we talked about, mindfulness, right? And I'm assuming single tasking versus multitasking. Would that be a practice? Or
yeah, I mean, okay. Generally, when attention becomes narrowly and intensely focused, it has a meditative effect. You know, and really any activity where you train your attention to focus on one particular object has a meditative type effect. It functions as a form of meditation. And it has an awareness. Maybe when your attention is focused, you don't notice very much. But when you end the practice and you open up your attention, then you're aware of much more newness around you, much more detail around you, and your sense of time starts to expand.
When we first started talking, we mentioned the receding of the ego, the benefit of kind of egolessness, or at least less ego, right? Sometimes it's forced upon you based on an accident or something else, or psychedelic experience. Are there practices, how would you, outside of us getting high or ramming our car into a tree or something, how would you, again, mindfulness plays a part here for sure, but outside of that, is there, you know, I was thinking, how do we become less egocentric? I can do an act of service for a stranger, right? With no motive, reaching outside of this, I think you called it a self-boundary. Is there anything else that you found? Because that's kind of hardwired, right? Where it's part of that survival mechanism that, to some degree, being selfish is survival.
To some degree. But yeah, I mean, I would also mention contact with nature. Contact with nature has an ego melting effect. It connects us with our surroundings. It stops us thinking. It quietens our minds. And also the sheer detail, when you're walking through the countryside, through a landscape, there's so much detail around you that your mind naturally processes. I mean, I often go climbing and walking, and at the end of the day, you know, when it's maybe six o'clock in the evening, I feel like I've been away for days. It seems like such a long time when I get back home, just because I've processed so much detail from my surroundings. And also, I think because my ego has become softer, you know, the boundary has become softer, I've become connected to nature. So I think nature has a powerful meditative type effect.
So have you quantified some, or do you have heuristics or checklists, or has writing this book and doing these studies on time, have you put some practices in your own life? And I guess maybe all of the above that we just mentioned. I'm just curious about your experience and your subjectivity and how you live your life with your ideas about time and concepts and all the research.
Well, I mean, as you say, I don't consciously try to generate accidents or emergencies. It's a good idea. It would expand time, but it's also quite...
Let's put on a helmet. Let's just try it. Let's...
I do a lot of cycling, and it's so dangerous cycling that, when I get home after cycling for a few miles, I feel, wow, I've made it. I'm still alive.
I used to do jujitsu, and we're throwing in judo. We would throw each other. You know, I was young. I didn't care, but it was great. But I'm not doing that now. That's not going to happen. Yeah,
but seriously, it takes me maybe half an hour to cycle home from work. And it's, it's so dangerous. I have so many potential accidents that I just narrowly avoid. It feels like I just narrowly avoid. So I get home and think, wow, I've made it. I'm still alive. But it also feels like a lot of time has passed, not just half an hour. It feels like 2 hours.
You've risked your life to expand your experience of life.
Exactly. Yeah. No, but more seriously, yeah, I do intentionally spend a lot of time in nature because it does have a time expanding effect, as well as a, therapeutic healing effect. And
you know what? Maybe I just thought of people who parachute, people who climb mountains. Now I'm like, I'm thinking not only is it flow, but it's probably time expanding to these people. So,
yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Sorry, I interrupted you. Yeah.
No, I think that's a good point. Yeah, and also I do make a conscious effort to introduce newness into my life. I always try to be curious. My it's great to have. I've got 3 teenage kids, so they're continually feeding me new information about music and sport, things I don't know about. So I feel like I'm learning new things. I try to keep learning new things, keep new hobbies, new challenges. So I think that's all good for the mind.
Yeah,
it's also good for time perception. It expands time. And beyond that, I do meditate. I try to meditate every day. And like I said before, when I have a good meditation, it does feel like time opens up. It's paradoxical, really, because I feel that after a good meditation, everything is kind of moving slowly. I'm moving slowly, kind of gracefully. Life is taking place quite gracefully. But at the same time, there's this kind of opening of time. I feel like I have more time to do things. And maybe it's because I'm aware of more detail. There's more information entering my consciousness. But yeah, it does seem to have a time expanding effect.
Before you go, I just wanted to touch on this because I don't think I've seen this word before, but panspiritism. So, I've heard of animism and pantheism and even cosmopsychism, and like I said, panpsychism from a standpoint of consciousness is fundamental. Tell me about panspiritism. I'm just curious.
Panspiritism is similar to panpsychism, but the issue I have with panpsychism is that it limits consciousness to material particles. It says that every material particle has an element or a kind of tiny flicker of consciousness in it. But I think consciousness extends beyond that. I think consciousness actually extends through space. So that, literally as we sit in this room, consciousness is everywhere around us. In space, it also permeates or pervades every object around us. So consciousness is like, you could compare it to air. It permeates everything. It flows through all space. And it is fundamental. I think the universe, before the physical universe existed, consciousness existed. And in some sense, maybe the physical universe emerged from a fundamental consciousness. So yeah, it's this more kind of extended version of panpsychism, I guess.
I talked to Ian McGilchrist about, the brain hemispheres, and it's fascinating conversation. I think he believes that consciousness is kind of like a radio signal, and we're receivers to a certain extent. Is that your view?
Yeah, panspiritism is similar. I suggest that, the brain doesn't produce consciousness, but the brain, if you like, receives consciousness. It receives consciousness from all around us, and it transmits it into our own being. So all the cells of our brain act as tiny receivers of consciousness, and they also transmit consciousness into our own beings. There's a correlation between the intensity of consciousness and the complexity of a physical structure. So, there are many animals which, like take an insect. Insects maybe have 1 million brain cells. So they only transmit consciousness to a limited degree because they only have 1 million brain cells. But we have 100 billion brain cells and lots of other cells in different parts of our bodies. So we can obviously transmit consciousness more intensely. So we have a more detailed and expansive awareness, consciousness than an insect. I think the good thing about it suggests that panspiritism suggests that our own individual consciousness is essentially the same as the consciousness of the universe. It's an influx or channel of that fundamental consciousness. So there's a fundamental oneness which we can experience between our own consciousness and universal consciousness.
I'm going to have Philip Goff on. We're going to talk about,
right.
He believes that the universe has a purpose. And so we're going to have the conversation. Does this apply at all to time expansion, panspiritism, and consciousness?
The link is that fundamental consciousness is timeless. I think time emerges from a timeless state in the same way that the physical universe emerges from a fundamental consciousness. So I think when people experience timelessness, time expansion, which merges into timelessness and intense experiences, I think they are experiencing consciousness at a fundamental level. They're kind of attuning to the fundamental reality of the universe, which is why, in deep states of meditation or in intense mystical experiences, timelessness, is often described.
How do NDEs play into this, near-death experiences? Is it the life review that you're connecting to time expansion or revealing of the block universe? I'm sorry, I didn't.
The life review is part of it. The life review suggests that time becomes spatial. So
this, just for our audience, the life review is this, and correct me, but somebody's dying, but they see their life flash before their eyes type of thing? Is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Literally their life flashes before their eyes. And so that literally every experience they've ever had appears before them. And even if it only takes place in a few seconds of normal time, literally they re-experience every moment of their lives. Sometimes it's just a selection of intense experiences, but often it is every experience of their whole lives. So that suggests that time becomes spatial. It becomes a panorama. But also in near-death experiences outside the life review, people often talk about, they often say that time just didn't exist. In this state of consciousness, there was no time. It just disappeared altogether. And that to me suggests that, in near-death experiences, people are attuning to the fundamental reality, the fundamental consciousness of the universe. They're attuning to the fundamental timelessness of reality.
Okay, so now this is we're leading up to, I think you're proposing that time expansion experiences, the emergencies, the slowing down, all of these things are peeking behind the curtain, so to speak, of some reality. Is that right?
Exactly. Okay. That's why people often, even if it's just an accident, or even if they've taken some psychedelics, people often feel that there's a revelatory quality to these experiences. People do feel that they've seen something beyond their normal reality. And they're convinced that it isn't illusory. It's not a hallucination. It is a glimpse of a deeper, more real universe. So there is a revelatory quality. Once these experiences are over, they are transformative because people feel that they've seen beyond the veil. They've had a glimpse into a more intense reality.
So then
once you've seen that, you never forget it.
Oh, that's interesting. So you would then, I'm assuming, say that a psychedelic is releasing some governor to our conscious experience. In other words, we have some filter in our brains or something, and psychedelics opens it up, I should say.
Yeah, psychedelics can do that. I mean, obviously they don't always do that, but they can open.
That's what I'm saying. You think that can happen? That's a possibility. Okay.
Yeah. And again, when people have that experience, they know that they've seen something real, something beyond their normal experience. And that's why psychedelics can be transformative, you know. I like
Yeah,
balance.
even when I hear hardened agnostics, atheists, skeptics, scientists, I've heard a few who have taken trips, psychedelic trips. When they recount the story, it does sound awfully like some reality that they've experienced. You know, going down the street, visiting a new house, like their story
Yeah.
being related to me. It sounds like an actual journey somewhere.
Mm.
And I'm not saying it is. I'm skeptical of all that, but I'm just saying when I hear these stories, it certainly
Yeah.
yeah.
I think when these experiences really are transformative, then that kind of implies some ontological reality, some sort of authenticity to the experiences. Experiences which are not genuine are usually not transformative. Now, if you may have a, really interesting, provocative dream, but when you wake up, you think, oh, wow, that was a great dream, but it was just a dream. It doesn't transform you. If you have some kind of visual hallucination, maybe due to tiredness or hunger, it could be interesting, but it doesn't transform you. You think, wow, that was interesting, but it's gone away and, I'm back to normal reality. But when you have one of these experiences, a time expansion experience or a psychedelic experience, a mystical experience, then it is like the opening of a door to a wider reality, a more intense reality. And it does change you. You're never quite the same person after it. And, and it does transform the way you live and the way you see the world.
Well, is there either a period or exclamation point you want to put on our conversation? Something I overlooked, or we should any icing on the cake that I missed out on?
Well, maybe I could just end by saying that I think we human beings tend to underestimate ourselves and the degree of control that we have over our own lives and over the world we live in. And I think time perception is a case of that. We do actually potentially have a lot of control over the way we experience time, but we often don't enact that degree of control. So we can control our time perception. We can slow down time if we want to. We can speed up if we want to. So I think we should use that ability more consciously to improve our lives and maybe to help us gain access to a wider, more intense reality.
I'm assuming you would consider yourself spiritual. Is there? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not religious at all.
Okay.
I don't believe in God, but I do believe that the reality we perceive ordinarily, is not an objective reality. I believe that our consciousness is contracted to some degree, and that it is possible for us to extend and expand our consciousness. And that also means, increasing our well-being and increasing our connection to others and our connection to nature.
Yeah, the more I learn, the less I know. I feel like, it's like,
yeah,
I was so sure of myself and of things when I was younger. Now I'm like, I don't, but I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
I was never comfortable with uncertainty when I was younger. So yeah, I think it's progress, right? I'm evolving.
Progress. Yeah, I like what going back to William James. He said we should never close our account with reality, and we should never say this is the way things are. We should always be open to new possibilities and new horizons. So yes, it's great to be in that state.
Yeah, Stephen, thank you so much for coming on for this conversation.
Thank you.
Where can people find you and/or sign up, read what you've written, so on and so forth? I know you've got books, a lot of books out there where books are sold, but is there any one location that you would refer? I'm going to put them in the show notes.
The best place is my website, which is stephenmtaylor.com. That's Stephen with a V, M for Mark, stephenmtaylor.com. And you can sign up for my newsletter there and read lots of articles and find out about my online courses and my events and so forth.
New book coming?
I have a kind of hobby of writing poetry, so I've just published a new book of poetry.
You're very prolific from a book standpoint, that's for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and next year I've got a book about the Beatles coming out. I've written about the psychology and the kind of spirituality and mysticism of the Beatles.
Oh, I've got to read that. Yeah, that's great.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a book about creativity, really, about why the Beatles were so prolific and why they evolved so quickly, and why they were so attuned to the zeitgeist of the 1960s. So it's been really interesting to write it.
You're just in the middle or just started? Yeah.
No, it's going to be published next September 2026. It's called Across the Universe, The Magic and Mystery of the Beatles' Creativity.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks, Larry. It was a pleasure.
Well, that's a wrap. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed it, do share it with your friends and on your social platforms. Big thanks to Sam Williams, my audio guy, and the beautiful bumper music you're hearing is Michael Petrovich's Bella Luna. For all my show notes or resource links, visit larryweeks.com, and we will talk again soon.